In this interview, we hear from Julia. She's 26 years old, living in Boston, Massachusetts. She has a background in biomedical engineering, and she shares what it's like to be an engineer, as well as to transition to an adjacent role. Let's get started.
Hi, Julia. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really excited to hear about your career as an engineer. Thank you for joining me.
Thanks for having me, Bridget.
Awesome. So can you tell me a little bit about your education? Because I'm assuming engineers need a decent amount of credentials to do what they do.
Yeah, sure. So my background is I got my bachelor's and my master's in biomedical engineering back in Binghamton with you. And then after that, I actually went on into BioTech, where I was actually hired as an engineer in research and development.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that's kind of like where I started. The term engineer is actually really broad. I've come across so many different people within my organization, within my company, where we all had the title engineer, but actually we all did such vastly different things. I knew some people that worked in mechanical labs with the traditional table saw, and you had your 3D printers. I also knew people, engineers that did data mining, and I actually did none of those things. I actually worked in a classic, like a scientific lab. It's like, it was called the materials management group. So what that is basically, in R&D, and I guess a lot of biotech, they have their own category of materials management, where the company, whatever they make, buy, or sell, those drugs kind of come through this one group, people that kind of manage and sort. You intake a stock, and then you distribute to people who are doing testing or purification, whatever the job requires. And so that's the group that I was a part of.
Awesome. And so what did your day-to-day look like in that role?
That was actually, it varied from day to day. It could either be tons of meetings, or it could be troubleshooting in the lab. So a day in the lab, sometimes when you had troubleshooting, could be really stressful, but it's actually a lot of fun sometimes. So my lab was pretty automated. We had a lot of equipment that did a lot of liquid handling, and we had a lot of robotics that kind of carried through the process of being able to take materials that we had from point A to point B. And so when that automation would malfunction, or if we had any issues, crashes, a lot of people would see it, because it was almost like we were in a fish tank where we had all glass windows, and people in the office space will be kind of sitting there just watching the automation just malfunction. You'll see things go flying.
Oh my gosh.
It's a thing. And so those days were particularly interesting, sometimes stressful, but you could spend anywhere from like a few minutes to troubleshooting a piece of automation to a couple of hours. But on good days, it's pretty smooth sailing. Just typical meetings, meeting with whether it was chemists or biologists who wanted materials in a certain format, or they wanted to deliver something to us to store or hold their materials for the company, for others to access. Coordinating all of that was a part of my job.
Awesome. And now this might be a really silly question, but you said, things can go like flying. Do you wear like a lab coat, or is it just like business casual attire? Like this probably isn't that important to people, but I'm just curious.
No, well, that's actually a really important question, because when I first got there, when I first was hired, I was like, what do I wear? I went in with slacks at first for the first day with, a nice blouse. And I quickly realized that you can't stick your head in a piece of automation in uncomfortable clothing. So it was typically very casual, but when you're in the lab, you always have your PPE, so closed-toe shoes, typically jeans or some sort of full-length pants. You don't want to wear leggings because they're a little thin. At least in my lab, they were pretty strict. You always had a lab coat, safety glasses, hair tied back if you're a girl, or if you have long hair, rather.
Yeah. Oh, okay, cool. So maybe it wasn't that silly of a question.
No, it was a really good question. I would hate to have to be digging around, say, if things fell on the floor in slacks or a skirt.
Yeah. So you mentioned kind of coordinating with chemists. Do you have to like know their kind of like language or jargon and terminology in your role? Or is it pretty much just like, we need this, and you're like, oh, okay, I get it?
So I was really lucky in my role, because I came into this role where the people in my direct group had actually been in their roles for 10 plus years.
Okay.
So they kind of knew the language. I didn't need to know chemistry verbiage too well, honestly. It's more of, I want this stored at certain temperatures. Can you have that done? And it was very easy to translate basically the language. So.
Okay, awesome. So along with having worked with colleagues that have been in that role for a long time, were they able to mentor you and guide you through, I guess, the onboarding process, but whatever kind of career growth looks like in this field?
Yeah, actually, I was really fortunate with the group that I had because they've been in this role for 10 plus years, right? So they knew their roles inside and out. They knew all of the possible scenarios in which things could go bad, whether it was malfunctioning equipment or uh, missed deliveries, whatever it was. They knew kind of how to handle any situation.
Mm-hmm.
And they were very helpful in kind of teaching me what to do, why to do it, and why something else wouldn't work. There were a lot of times where I was like, why couldn't we just do path A instead of path B? And they're just like, well, you could try it. And sometimes they'd even let me try it and see it fail. And then we'd be like, oh, okay. Depending on the amount of time we'd have, obviously. But yeah, they were really great at mentoring and kind of showing me the trajectory for this role. And it's actually not a very traditional role. Technology is always changing. There, especially lab automations, there's always something new coming out. There's always something new going on. So you're kind of have to roll with the punches too.
Focusing a little bit on coming into the job market, you mentioned earlier there's a lot of diversity in engineering roles. What are some other paths people can take depending on if they have that like bio-focused engineering degree or a different one like a mechanical engineering?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I've seen a lot of my my classmates from college. They actually went on to work at various other companies where they worked. I know someone works on like prosthetics.
Mm-hmm.
I know people do like data analysis, data mining, data configuration. You can also, I know a lot of people end up straight. If you go into biotech, you can be on the track of a scientist also.
Mm-hmm.
So those are people that develop different types of assays or kind of different testing techniques to understand if a material will work or not in a in vitro setting, I guess. So
Mm-hmm.
in vitro means like at the desk or at the bench.
No, thank you for that little explanation right there. So what is something that you would like to do, like in the longevity of your career going forward? It seems like there's a lot of room for jumping around in terms of different focuses or different types of entities you can work for. So do you have any like long-term plans?
Well, actually, so I made the jump from biotech to, I guess I've been calling it biotech adjacent.
Okay.
So I work now. I went from pharma and I went to this company that actually supplies laboratory information management systems.
Mm-hmm.
So what it is basically, they take the materials management group, for example, and
Mm-hmm.
they look at your workflow of how you process from when, say, a chemist or a biologist submits a material to you all the way to when you distribute it, and they
Mm-hmm.
provide a way for you to track it in a way where you're not just digging in a closet and looking in a container to see if you have something available.
Okay.
Yeah. So I actually made the switch from engineer to my new role is business applications consultant.
Mm-hmm.
And so what that does is it when people are interested in our software or the system itself, after they're interested and they purchase the software, we then go in. My role is to go in, sit down with the customer and see what nuances are in their workflow. How do we customize the software to fit their needs, essentially?
That's awesome. So, I mean, obviously, COVID times, is that done over Zoom calls in the future? Do you anticipate that being like a client site situation where you physically go to their lab or whatever setup they have?
Yeah, so I started during COVID actually, but I know that they used to do a lot of client on-site setups. They also did a lot of like workshops for the clients
Mm-hmm.
to learn more about their software, the new emerging technology from within the software, their updates and things like that. I don't know when or if we're going to go back to that setup.
Yeah.
Hopefully soon though, because I found that interacting directly with the clients and getting that perspective of seeing how their labs are set up and understanding their workflow in person makes all the difference between miscommunications. Sometimes that can happen over Zoom that can delay a project, you know?
Mm-hmm. So backtracking a little bit to your undergrad graduate experience, can you share a little bit about what landed you in that specific like bioengineering track? Because I know that the university we went to had a few different specialty options. So if you could speak to that.
Why I chose biomedical engineering specifically was actually a whirlwind of a ride, but ultimately it kind of came down to I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I kind of wanted to go down the pre-med track, but I also wasn't sure if that's what I wanted to commit myself to for 7+ years.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the bioengineering, at the time it was a bioengineering program, and then it was later changed to a biomedical engineering program. But I ended up, so I chose that because it opened up more options for me. It still touched on biology that I was still really interested in while also exploring engineering, which I also had a knack for too.
That's awesome. And so during your course of study, can you tell me a little bit about like what that looked like? Was it a lot of group projects? Was it a lot of research? What was it like?
The year that my cohort of biomedical engineers, there were a lot of things where you wrote papers on your own, where you you learned the material on your own, but there was a big focus on group work, I think.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of projects to work on together, and I think that really facilitated us in kind of retaining. It definitely facilitated my arsenal when I was interviewing for jobs and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Gave me a lot of projects.
So touching upon like the interviewing for jobs aspect, did you know when you were entering the job market what type of entities you wanted to look at, or were you open to like my first job, let's see what I can do, let's see what's out there?
I was really nervous about that.
Mm-hmm.
I had no idea what I was doing. One of the good things that I did have was I right after my bachelor's I did a 4+1 program so that I just got my master's out of the way. And because of that, I actually had a few friends already in industry where they kind of had a taste already of what was out there. They were like, these are the jobs out there. This is what I've kind of come across. So I kind of knew what I was sort of getting myself into, but I was still applying left, right, and center to I don't even know where, honestly.
Awesome. Yeah. So do you have any advice for someone who maybe will be entering the job market soon on how to narrow down their options? I know right now people probably can't be too picky, but in general, what do you think?
I definitely say shoot your shots. Like even when you read a job description and you're just like, I don't know if I fit that description, always just apply. The worst is you'll never hear back from them and you'll forget about it anyways.
That's fair.
Yeah, but it's a lot of blind applying, honestly, for me. And I didn't really know what I was doing either.
Mm-hmm.
But it just takes one person to take a chance on you. So I don't know. That gave me some sort of solace.
Is there anything about your career that is like surprising to you or unexpected, whether it was your first role or your current role, like anything surprised you?
Yeah, actually, so I've gone through 2 or 3 different jobs in this time frame, and I will say your first job really kind of shapes your outlook on the work world in general. It kind of sets that foundation, and I didn't realize how important that was until I moved on to my next job, where I found a different environment. It's a different, you're working with different people, different environment, different styles. And depending on the mindset you go into it, whether it was if you had a bad experience or a good experience in your first round, it's what you make of that experience. And I was really surprised by that. I know it sounds a little cliche, but I was really surprised by that.
Yeah, well, I think people don't really prepare you for that post-education era of your life, or at least in my experience, that's what I felt like. So it's kind of adjusting to a whole new like world once you're done with your schooling, and like figuring out the whole working world is a process in and of itself, regardless of what you do. So I feel that. I got you. So now can you speak a little bit to what your work schedule is like work-life balance? Obviously, COVID, it like people tend to be working more, I feel like, at least that's how I feel being at home.
Definitely. So actually, I didn't start work from home until I started my current position. at BioTech adjacent, I guess. That's what I'm
Yeah.
going to refer to it as.
Yeah.
But I've been doing it for about 2.5 months, and I don't know how some people have been doing it for the past year, quite honestly. Like, kudos to you if you survived. But I found it to be very hard personally for me. I'm so used to an everyday going into work, going into the lab, kind of carrying out daily processes that need to get done. Seeing a lot of people, whether it's, in a cafe, I guess the water cooler version, or what have you. But it's definitely an adjustment. I do feel like I'm tethered to my computer a little bit more than I would say when I was on site for my jobs. That's a little tiring mentally, so definitely got to start putting up to know when to put up the boundaries of work and play, definitely important.
Yeah, for sure. Do you find that there are certain personality traits or types that excel in the realm of engineering more so than others, maybe?
Okay, so with engineers, like I said, it was such a broad scope. I feel like you can see so many different personalities blossom depending on your role and what you need to do. But I do think like one of the key things that I did find was detail orientation, at least with the narrow scope of people that I've interacted with in all of their roles as an engineer. Making sure and paying attention to what you're doing, the finer details sometimes could make or break a project, definitely.
Do you see it being like the leading form of like employment or something like that? I feel like I read a lot about like if you want to have job security in the future, like do some kind of engineering.
I mean, I wouldn't say engineering is definitely job security per se. It does make you versatile. But I think, again, going back to engineering being so broad, I feel like you can take the skills that you know and apply it in different ways. And an example is that, so just because I'm in biotech doesn't necessarily limit me to only being in biotech. I can take the fundamentals of lab automations and apply that to any other type, maybe not any other type of technology, but other types of automation. Doesn't have to be laboratory or scientifically based.
That's probably a really good spot to wrap things up on. So thank you, Julia, so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, Bridget.